Hello, everybody, and welcome to the newest episode of the Lean Toss Up College Football Podcast. Today, we're going to be previewing a couple ACC teams, the SEC, and a couple of Sun Belt teams. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Buck Metrics. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. It's almost the weekend, which is always a hopeful time of the week.
Yes, the weekend is always the best time of the week. Um, but yeah, it's coming up on we're inching closer and closer to college football season, and as we get closer and closer, we're doing more and more of these previews, and yeah, it's pretty exciting. We're almost in we're almost at the college football season, so yeah, as we get closer, obviously we'll continue. We'll hopefully preview pretty much every team, and yeah, hopefully we'll get everybody ready for the season. So let's jump into a team that we've kind of talked a little bit about before. Um, but we've touched on them a little bit when talking about some of the other teams. But we'll get into them a bit more today. So Clemson. So last year, obviously, a bit of a disappointment. Actually, not a bit, a large disappointment for Clemson, as they they had pretty high aspirations last year. With well, they lost Trevor Lawrence, but their backup quarterback, DJ Eula Kahai, he was taking over, and there was high hopes for him because he actually had impressed when Trevor Lawrence had COVID for those two games. He actually he basically um, almost beat Notre Dame instead of whichever Lawrence is out. So there's pretty high hopes for them, but this team just was really bad. DJ was really bad. The defense was not well. The defense was really good, but it couldn't overcome the just systematic failure of the offense. And again, they didn't make the conference championship game. They didn't make a New Year's Six bowl. They eventually beat Iowa State in the Cheez-It Bowl, which is not a particularly great accomplishment if you're Clemson. So this year they're returning the same quarterback. Hopefully trying to get a little bit of a rebound here, but I don't know. A lot of people are going to be really hype about this team. I don't know if I'm one of those people. Is it possible that this team is now kind of going to have a couple of declining seasons until they can get a better quarterback? Like, do you think the problem was the quarterback? Do you think it was the offense generally? What do you kind of think here?
I'm going to draw the lens back and say it's kind of everything. Um, I see, last year they were the fourth best team in their division by my metrics, not in the ACC, but in their division. I had them behind NC State, Louisville, to whom I wrote my love letter a couple of podcasts ago, and Florida State, to whom I don't think I'm going to write a love letter anytime soon. And yet they were ahead of Clemson in my metrics. Um, you just look at some of the big picture things that are going on. 2 years ago, they lost Jeff Scott to South Florida. Now they lose Tony Elliott and they replace him with an internal promotion. So what goes to last year was you're kind of dealing with without Jeff Scott. Um, and obviously the offense fell quite a bit. I actually had them at almost a offensive rating of almost -4. They actually were behind UNLV for comps, which is I don't think you want to be comp to them on offense or defense at this point. Defense, they were still great. They were sixth nationally, but they lose Brett Venables, who I think I mentioned in the last podcast. I think he's probably the best defensive coordinator that we've seen in college football since Pete Carroll left USC. And they replaced him internally with an internal promotion, as they did on offense when they lost Tony Elliott. So, two internal promotions after you lose really, really solid assistants, better than solid. I mean, Venables is about as good as it gets. Um, they also lost the defensive line coach who Venables took with him to Norman, and they've been recruiting very well. But you have a season that's just that bad and that unexpected. If you kind of put it on a blind resume, it really looks like this is kind of the inflection point where an a dynasty either takes that first step down from dynastic to still pretty good, best case, or it could get worse from here. Um, you know, DJU, like you mentioned, was you have him as disappointing. I had him with the QB plus of 57, which is really bad. Only um, Will Plummer at Arizona was worse about among all the quarterbacks that qualified, which is just horrible. Um, so I'm really, really, really interested to see what happens to this team because, like I said, I think best case it was just okay, just the first half step back you see like USC when after Reggie and Matt left, um, this doesn't apply to Alabama because Nick Saban is made of, material that humans aren't made of. But you see this, when dynasties slide, it's usually like your top assistants that have really brought you there leave and you replace them with somebody who's not as great. And internally that's really, really not the way I like to go. The other thing is as bad as their record was, they actually had good luck of over a game and a half last year. So there's actually some regression that I think is still to come. Um, the season Vegas has their season total wins at 7 or 10, and conference wins at 7, and I'm definitely going under at both. I am actually probably going to like cut in line to make those bets. Very much looking forward to that. If they can keep it under 2 losses, great. Beat me with just 1 loss, but I don't see it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. There's a lot of question marks about this Clemson team. I think a lot of people are penciling them in for being competitive and maybe even making a run at the playoffs. I think they actually have somewhat semi decent odds for making the playoffs. But I mean, again, and this can kind of add some pressure. Like if this Clemson team isn't good this year, could that potentially add some pressure for Dabo Sweeney to get out of Clemson? Right? Like um, there could be some pressure on Dabo if this team isn't performing. Now again, I don't know who they have coming down the pipeline in terms of quarterbacks, but again, if we're in the NIL era and if you're relying on if you're relying on media deals to have the money to pay for that and the ACC's media deal. So this is the thing, right? So this could be kind of a turning point for this team, right? I mean, Florida State used to dominate this conference, and Clemson kind of came up in the 2010s. Now Clemson's dominated this conference. Maybe it's time for someone else to take the reins here a little bit. And I think it's very possible that Clemson isn't the best team in the conference anymore. I think we need to kind of like Pittsburgh won it last year. I think a lot of people are going to kind of wave it off as, oh well, they had Kenny Pickett, and to be fair, that there is a little bit of there that is fair. But I think at the same point in time, I think there's some serious reasons to doubt Clemson's ability to win this conference. Um, moving on to
You
the
know, one
next,
one one thing. Sorry, just one
yeah,
thing. You made a really good point with the NIL. The ACC has such a horrible television deal, media rights deal, that nationally, I think they might find themselves falling a little behind. And then when you say NIL, I think of that crazy booster in Miami who's just kind of just throwing away money at anybody that likes to play football. And Miami could actually somehow be the one. I think that if there's going to be a next one to kind of assert its dominance over the conference, it might be them. Now, you've always got the wild card of what kind of crazy thing is Mario Cristobal going to do in the fourth quarter of a game that's going to cost his team. But he does that twice a year. He doesn't make it a weekly habit like some coaches that used to be at USC or at Texas now. So it'll be interesting. And you make a good point about the NIL as it relates to Clemson.
yeah, that's the thing. The thing of it is, like, it's a good point, but and also at the same time, we don't know, right? Like, I think
Hmm.
that's what could happen, and it's gonna be really fascinating to see it. I mean, again, we're now living in an era where the top schools are gonna be able to just go out there and buy a quarterback, right? And
Yeah.
like, there's no more of this. Well, oh, the guy, like, if there's a good quarterback from South Carolina, he's not necessarily going to Clemson. He's going to go to Texas or Georgia or Alabama or Florida or Miami, right? He's going to go where the money is. He's not going to just go to the home state university. Now, to be fair, that was kind of that hasn't been true for like a decade, but still though, like that's just either further compacted by that now, right? So
Yep.
it's yeah, it's a new world, and it's going to take us a couple of years to figure this out. But when we're talking about maybe potentially this kind of Clemson dynasty coming to an end, I don't know. Maybe that could be part of it. Because again, remember they've had really good quarterbacks, right? They had Deshaun Watson, who, I mean, yes, there's lots of other things we could talk about Deshaun Watson for, but he was a pretty good quarterback at Clemson, right? And same thing with Trevor Lawrence. He was the first overall. Actually, both of them were. I believe Deshaun Watson was the first overall pick, if I'm mistaken. I can't remember. That was a couple years ago, but uh, both very good quarterbacks, and both led them to national championships. Maybe they needed a really good quarterback, and that was not DJ, right? So
Yep.
let's see what happens this year. So and then the years after that. So the next team is a team that while basically that I think they in many ways they find themselves in the position that Clemson was in last year. So North Carolina. So obviously Sam Howell. This is a team we've talked about quite a bit already. So Sam Howell obviously was their quarterback last year. He got drafted by the Washington Commanders. Um, the thing of it is there's debates about if Sam Howell is good or not. I kind of think he is good, but he was kind of let down by his team. Also just like horrendous. Like this team was God. Like this team was like my model liked this team a lot, but this team would just like they'd lose games they shouldn't have lost. There was a loss to Pittsburgh. I talked about this before. That was particularly annoying to me, especially the fact that they couldn't cover the 6.5. That Pittsburgh covered the 6.5. Like, there's a lot of times that this team lost games they just shouldn't have lost. Like they'd have big leads and they'd blow them, and then they wouldn't even cover the plus point spread. So there's a this team was a ride was a journey last year. Now now they've replaced Sam Howell, and I mean, you've got Mac Brown, who was the former coach of Texas. He'd been the coach of Texas for a while. Then they got rid of him, and he kind of found a home at North Carolina. Um, I don't know. I'm penciling in this team as a regression candidate this year. I don't think I don't think they're gonna be that good. I feel like this is gonna be the year where people overhype North Carolina. You already see that week one. They're a 3-point favorite against Appalachian State. I think Appalachian State wins that game. Like I feel like this is a team that's going to lose a lot of games this year, and they're going to take a couple of years to kind of rebuild. What are your thoughts on North Carolina?
Yeah, the first thing that sticks out to me obviously is Sam Howell. He had a really, really good QB plus of 131. Um, but I'm kind of just wondering, is he a really, really good program quarterback? Or is he just what they call in basketball like a good stats on a bad team guy? And I bring that up because in their losses to really not a great group of teams here, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, and Florida State, that offense scored only 19 points. So I think there might be an element of just kind of running it up on some of the, well, even lesser than some of the lesser teams on defense and just not being there against some of the better ones. They also are kind of starting over on the offensive line. They have one of the lower returning or improvement metrics on the offensive line in all of FBS. But I think there's some hope there, and what makes me think so is Mac Brown's recruited really, really well for an ACC program. Um, they also had bad luck last season. I have them as having 1.4 games of bad luck last season, and we mentioned the K Ford ratings. K Ford has them improving by 1.9 wins. So there's two data points there. So now you're going against two folks on your regression hope there. Defense. Their defense was really poor. Actually, and when I made my case for Louisville, the one thing that I was concerned about with Louisville was their defense, and I actually had North Carolina's defense as worse than Louisville's last year. So they're starting from a worse spot. Now they bring in Gene Chizik as defensive coordinator, who I think he was there kind of as a consultant a few years ago. He knows Mac, so he'll get along well. They've got a very far above average improvement metric on the defensive on their defense. So I think we're going to see a big improvement there between just the new DC, who's totally proven, and just the defense maturing. So I'm bullish on the heels. Now the thing that really stinks is they've got these, the non-conference, they have back-to-back games at Appalachian State and Georgia State, and to a lot of fans that means nothing, but I guarantee you that if you're in North Carolina, you know that game at Appalachian State is an absolute trap. Very losable to a program that knows how to win, that loves to knock off name programs bigger than that. Remember, App State beat Michigan in the first game ever on the Big Ten Network. And Georgia State has been improving pretty steadily um, since Sean Elliott's gotten there. Back-to-back road games against Sun Belt teams, just not what you want to do if you're trying to, get going. And then you host Notre Dame, so they could be in a tough spot as relates to non-conference. But I think there's a lot of pieces to surprise people in conference. Their conference total is only 4.5 wins, and they play 8 conference games. I like the over, and I might take a little piece of the ACC champs. Circus Sports has them at plus 880. And the important thing here is that's second in their division. So, number one, they've probably got an easier path than people might expect. And number two, I think the fact that they're second in their division really informs that the over 4.5 in conference play is the way to go there.
Yeah, I mean, the ACC is kind of not going to be particularly amazing this year. I think maybe it's not a bad idea to pick an over on the team total, but yeah, like I think we're all. I'm looking at that App State game, and it's like this is such a clear trap. Like I've started getting a lot better at like old me would have bet I've been betting college football for a couple of years, and like old me week one would have bet would definitely have bet North Carolina there. But like, okay, North Carolina, it'd been like, oh, Cincinnati +7 against Arkansas. Oh yeah, Cincinnati made the playoffs last year. They could like this is the thing. You have to and like you just get crushed, right? So like you have to start seeing what's the obvious like there's college football I feel like is the most obvious trap one because like there's so many times when it's like okay this is so very clearly a trap and they're very clearly setting up for they want people to bet a certain way and they're setting it up for so that you could bet that way and that's the thing. So no, that's so much trap and this team could be okay. They could maybe they could do some damage. I mean, there's questions about how Pittsburgh's going to be in the ACC this year. Miami, Florida State again is I don't even know where Florida State's going to be this year. So they can maybe pick off a couple of those wins, especially Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech isn't really impressing anybody right now, so there's probably some targets that they could have there that might actually do pretty well for them.
Yeah, I saw somebody on Twitter just this afternoon said, "Who's your chaos team this year?" And I actually said North Carolina in that I don't know if they're going to win the conference, although plus 880 is a nice price, but they're capable of beating, I think, anybody that has designs on winning that conference.
hmm Yeah, I think they could, but it's yeah, it's really going to depend on the quarterback though. Can they replace Sam Howell at quarterback? That's the thing, and fix some of the bad luck from last year, I guess. So anyway, moving on to the what's going to be the I think is a really interesting conference this year, the SEC. So you sent me here some bullet points here, and I agree with one. No threat to Alabama in the West. I pretty much agree with that. No threat to Georgia in the East. I actually disagree with that. I think there might be
Wow.
one or two threats to Georgia in the East, but let's talk about some of the other teams that we'll just kind of mouse over here for a second. So Mississippi State. Um, a lot of people are I'm seeing a lot of people penciling in Mississippi State for being a good team this year. So usually when he gets a quarterback with experience under him, they usually do well. Will Rogers is again generally he's definitely considered a top draft prospect. So it's possible that people could be looking at that. Uh, so are you kind of high on this Mississippi? Like I know a lot of people are, but again, remember this is the SEC West. This
Yeah.
isn't the ACC, right? So like,
Yeah, if I look,
where's the ceiling? Like, what's the floor? What's the ceiling here for that then?
yeah, I think that's it. I think if I'm in Starkville, I'm excited. As a fan, they're more often than not fun to watch because that offense can do crazy things, both great and awful. And then you never know with Mike Leach when you're going to have just a fantastic post game press conference. And their defensive coordinators like still kind of underrated, but really solid. I think probably they can get to 8. Outside chance 9 wins, but they're not gonna. You know, best case would be a very distant second in the West, and that's when if everything falls right.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably no Texas A&M's a lot of questions there at quarterback, but I'd say probably rather take Texas A&M in a battle for if I was to pick someone to get second in the SEC West. Um, Arkansas. So this is another one that a lot of people are also talking about KJ Jefferson here. Um, I kind of like this Arkansas team at times last year, but they had Alabama and Georgia, and they kind of got crushed by both of them pretty badly. But I think you could definitely start seeing when like these teams will play other teams that they're better than, and they'll play out of conference, right? So what are your thoughts on this team? I think you kind of have them penciled for a brutal non-conference schedule, but like again, it's SEC versus not SEC. I think they could still win that. What do you think?
Yeah, when I think of Arkansas, this Arkansas program as it is now, I think to 2 years ago when I, for some reason, was really, really bullish on them being better than people expected in the first year of Sam Pittman, and it was kind of a weird confluence of they returned all of their offensive linemen, albeit from a bad team, but they had a lot of experience, and their head coach is a former offensive line coach, so you knew that he would make the most of whatever they had there. And they had a experienced quarterback in Felipe Franks, and nobody expected anything from them. And they did okay. They actually were just a bad call against Auburn away, I think, for making a bowl that year. And then everybody just kind of thought, well, they improved, but last season in 21, let's just see them do it again, and they totally did it. So a big part of the appeal that I've had towards them is the surprise factor. And now that KJ Jefferson's really, a lot more well known, the surprise factor isn't there. I think they're just gonna probably, meet expectations. They have that tough non-conference schedule. I mean, they host Cincinnati, and they're at BYU in the middle of October, which is just insipid. I don't know why you do that when you're in the SEC. It's nuts. Um, I think they probably win 7 games, but they're as good as last season. It's just, a tougher slate really just kind of hides their level of play.
Yeah, I mean that Arkansas versus BYU game, that could be pretty interesting. I think definitely that could be a very good game. But yeah, I mean you're a South team. I don't know why you want to go travel far west and north too. So it's very cold there in Utah, Provo, in December. Um, all right, Texas A&M. So again, this is a team we've kind of talked about a little bit before. Um, they got rid of Calzada and they're putting in Max Johnson, who was LSU's quarterback last year. I don't like. I'm a little concerned about that. Obviously, Calzada was like okay. I don't know why the I don't know. Like maybe you want an upgrade, but is Max Johnson really that big of an upgrade? It's really questionable in my opinion on that. But I mean, again, I guess if you feel like if you feel you need that piece, and then maybe it was like we don't want Calzada, but then you're like you find someone else, and you're like, I guess this guy's a little better, but maybe he is, maybe he isn't, right? I don't know. I just think that's a really big risk, and I can't really I don't know if I could take this team for that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my first impression is if you're saying Calzada wasn't that bad, I'm kind of wishing that you're a professor and I was a student way back when I was in school, because I think I would have gotten some pretty easy grades. I thought Calzada stunk last season, except for that just otherworldly, just out of nowhere game against Alabama. His QB plus I think was like 79 for the season. The thing you make a good point is Max Johnson is an upgrade, but he's average, and average is not going to win a lot of games in the SEC West. Not only that, um, that Jimbo offense is kind of notorious for being a lot for quarterbacks to pick up. Now, Max Johnson is actually the son of Brad Johnson, who was an NFL quarterback, so maybe he just picks up things a lot more quickly. But it wouldn't surprise me if Max Johnson's numbers actually regress, even though he's surrounded by more talent, just because it's going to take him well to pick that up. The other thing is they lose one of the best defensive coordinators in Mike Elko. They pick up a good one in DJ Durkin, but you're going to have some kind of transition issues there as well, I'm sure. So I, they still have a ton of talent in there. In preparing all these things, I've been watching a lot of YouTube of pregame videos of just like different stadiums before kickoff when teams come out. And when I watch those from Kyle Field, I kind of wonder how do they ever lose to a team that's not in the top 5? What an awesome home field. And you look and they're 8-4 last season. So there's some things that don't add up. And I just think with all these kind of different pluses and minuses, they're an absolute wild card. They're almost like North Carolina, but less optimistically so that I think they can beat anybody in the division, but they're not going to win the division.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? I mean, you got Alabama right there. We just talked about Arkansas. We just talked about Mississippi State, right? Like, there's all those teams that are right there, and they're all really good, right? And A&M will have their year. I fully believe that we will be talking about a Texas A&M national championship at some point. Whether or not that is next year, 2 years down the road, they're gonna someone on Texas A&M is gonna bribe some kid to go play quarterback for them, and then they'll be a national champion. The thing, and they have a good team, and they'll get there, and that's the thing. It's not. I don't think it's going to be this year, but they're recruiting better. They're doing better at this, so I suspect we will see a national championship there in Texas A&M. And again, and this is kind of the thing, right? Jimbo's pretty young as a head coach. Nick Saban, though, he's getting up there, right? He's in his 60s, right? I mean, here's the thing. Like, yes, Nick Saban is 100% the best of all time. Probably the greatest head, probably the best head coach in college football history. But at a certain point, he's not going to be the head coach of Alabama anymore. Unless they like start stripping him out and making him a cyborg, he will eventually not be the head coach of Alabama. So this is the thing. At some point, someone else is going to win the SEC West. And that team will probably not be Auburn. Someone else other than Auburn when they beat them in the Iron Bowl. Someone else is going to win the SEC West. And this is the thing. And it's now kind of a race too. Like, if Nick Saban retires in 5 years, in 10 years, who's right there? And I think that's the interesting question about who's going to be there and who's going to have built up the program that they can compete with new look Alabama at that point. Then, um, now let's kind of go to the actually no let's stick with the West for a bit here. Um, LSU. So LSU again, a program that, I mean, here's the thing. It's crazy we're talking about them. They were 2 years away. Sorry, 2 years removed from a national championship, which they won with the number one overall pick in Joe Burrow, and then the next year they had like the sixth overall pick in Jamar Chase. Those two got reunited at Cincinnati. Actually made the Super Bowl. Almost won the Super Bowl. And now this team is now rebuilt. Now we're talking about a rebuilding LSU team, which just shows you how up and down college football can be, especially in the SEC. Um, I It's weird. I mean, obviously they fired their head coach. I can't remember what was his name. What was his name? The head coach for LSU last year. I can't remember what his name was now.
Yeah, Coach Orgeron.
Oh, Orgeron. That's right. Yeah, yeah. He got
Yeah.
fired because of comments and, well, no, wasn't it he got fired because he like hit on like a booster's wife or something or?
No, that's a different LSU coach. That was Les Miles.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Coach O just got fired for kind of being at a Coach O level of head coaching.
Yeah, that's the thing. So yeah, lots of LSU coaching scandals. Now they've got Brian Kelly, who immediately decided to debut his Southern drawl there
Oh.
at that basketball game. That was hilarious. But they now have a coach, but that's about it. I mean, obviously, coaching gets you a lot in college football. Um, but is that enough for a couple wins in the SEC West? Right? I mean, we've just talked about pretty much everybody in that division, right? Mississippi State's good. Arkansas is pretty good. Texas A&M's good. Okay, that's pretty much everybody. We're talking about Auburn. Well, Auburn. Okay, fine. Yeah, we'll talk about Auburn later. But like, that's maybe not that great. So like, there's a couple of teams that I'm kind of like, yeah, whatever. But like, can LSU get to a couple wins? I think their over is 3. Um, I don't know. It's a tough call. I don't love it particularly. LSU might be kind of a spot team for me. I don't know if I want to bet a future or so on them, but um, yeah, we'll have to see. What are your thoughts on LSU this year? Do you think this is like, again? Obviously, there's low expectations here for Bryant Kelly. They're not going to win the SEC West this year. But what do you think? Like, and the other question about this is like, how good of a head coach is Brian Kelly? I mean, he was a head coach at Notre Dame, but it felt that a lot of the times whenever they played a top team, they got blown out a lot. I mean, how many times did they make the college football playoff only to get blown out by a number one seed Alabama by like 40 points? Right? This is the thing. So where like do you think this is going to work out like now or longer term, or do you think this is kind of doomed for failure here?
I think it very much works out. I'm not gonna play it, but I think the over 3 conference wins is tempting. I've been a Brian Kelly fan basically since he was, turning purple in the face, yelling at his players at Central Michigan. The guy just wins everywhere he goes. He's just a great coach. Um, you remember in podcast one, I went over my good luck, bad luck metrics, and just the regression after you have a good luck season, especially, is crazy. Your team really comes back to earth the following season. And the one exception to that was Notre Dame actually had good luck in 2020 and 21. They had over 3 games of good luck in 2020 and almost 3 games of good luck in 2021, and that's confirmed by K Ford, who basically is projecting them to drop 1.7 wins next season versus last season. And I attribute that to Brian Kelly because, does he do great Southern accents? No. Does he engender love from his boosters? No. Is he the best recruiter? No. But he is awesome at winning football games. And, I think it took him a little bit of time at Notre Dame because he had to really, get more of his kind of guys in there. I don't know if it's that long of a transition. I think he inherits a lot more talent at LSU. And to your point, I think he inherits some of the high end talent at LSU, not all over, but some of the high end athletes that he didn't have enough of at Notre Dame, to be more competitive in those playoff games. To answer your question about when Nick Saban leaves Alabama, which is going to be awesome, and that place turns into, post Saddam Hussein Iraq, and they're just each other's throats. Who inherits that throne? I think it's going to be LSU. 'Cause Brian Kelly knows how to win. He's at by far the best place he will ever be in or have been to recruit to. All respect to Notre Dame, but it's a very different thing recruiting to Notre Dame and what comes with that than recruiting to LSU and all that comes with that.
Well, and this is the thing, right? We make a good point there about what happens when Saban isn't there. And the thing of it is, when you have these super competitive divisions, right? Like to be in the SEC West, if you want any sort of meaningful results, you have to pour in money and you have to get a good coach. You have to get good players, right? And the thing of it is, we talk about what's going to happen when Saban isn't the head coach of Alabama. Alabama's immediately going to regress because this is a division that has had to basically overspend compared to literally everybody just to stay afloat for a decade now. And like, think if you're Mississippi State, how much money, how much recruiting you have to spend just to get 3 wins a year, right? Like, if you spent the same as like some other teams in some other conferences, you'd be getting blown out. You could like that's the thing. That's the level of competitiveness here in the SEC West. So, like, this is the thing. There's a lot of like once Nick Saban is gone from Alabama, or if Alabama has a down year, which I think is physically impossible, but if they did have a down year, or Saban is gone, then yeah, you're going to see a battle between Brian Kelly. You're going to see a battle between Jimbo Fisher, and again, I mean, here's the thing. Probably by that point, we're going to have a 12-team playoff, so like all of them are going to make the playoffs anyways. So like one of them will win the SEC, and then the other ones will make the playoffs, and then we'll duke it out that way. But no, it's going to be a fascinating battle in a couple of years when this is all said and done. I think Brian Kelly needs a couple of years. This LSU team I could see this team making a bowl, to be honest with you. If we had to say, I could see maybe making a bowl. But we'll have to see. I'm not completely sure. Missouri's in the East, right? Yeah, Missouri's in the East. So let's kind of go over to.
Yeah.
I think Vanderbilt's in the East too, right? Yeah. So let's go to
Yeah.
the East here. So
You want Okay.
okay, so yeah, so Kentucky is let's go up with Kentucky here. This is the thing. So a lot of people are pretty high on Kentucky with their quarterback Will Levis. I mean, the thing of it is, he was pretty good, but the problem is the fact that like I feel like this is just a little overhyped at this point, right? Like, how many times do we get a lot of quarterbacks that are hyped? And again, we kind of just said this about Arkansas and about Mississippi State. Kentucky, though, they have a habit of like upsetting a couple good teams, but then they have a habit of losing some games that they shouldn't be losing, right? And that's the thing. Um, what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you think that this team is gonna like again? how good, like, they how good of a quarterback is he gonna take to do some damage here in the SEC East here?
Yeah, I think they'll be okay. I think that people, to your point, are just maybe a little bit ahead of themselves in terms of how good Levis is, and that might be just because they've not really had a history of great quarterbacks in Kentucky. I had him at a QB plus of exactly 100, which means he's just average. Um, that's not going to get you too far in the SEC. The East is a little easier, but it's not a cakewalk by any stretch. They actually had, above average good luck. I had him at almost a game and a half of good luck, and K Ford is projecting a regression of one game as well. So, two data points on that there's probably been a little bit of dressed up element in their one loss record last season. I think they'll be okay. I like what Stoops does. The other thing is I'm pretty sure they're going to take a step back at offensive coordinator as well. They lost, I forget where Liam Cohen went, but I think he's somewhere in the NFL now. Actually, I think he went back to the Rams. He was a position coach with the Rams. He came to Kentucky for one season and got everybody super excited about the offense, and then he left. So I think just a guy that good at a place like Kentucky is not easily replaced.
Yeah, well, yeah, we'll have to see. I agree this team could be interesting, but at the same time, it's the SEC, right? I mean, you got Georgia, you got Florida, like any cross division foe you could face could be really good, right? It's always tough. Um, Missouri. They were not particularly great last year. They did beat Florida though, but yeah, I'm not seeing a lot to be particularly positive about. Um, how about you? Are you seeing any kind of green spots for this team?
Yeah, there are only 17 that have very much above average improvement metrics on both the offensive line and defense, and they're one of them. But the quarterback is just such it's they're just have not had good quarterback play for a while now, and I just don't see it getting better anytime soon. So I just they're going to be better, but I just don't think they're going to be a fun team to watch. Not that they really have been for quite some time. I like their coach; he really knows how to talk crap. Um, I don't know if you caught as soon as they announced before media day last year when Texas and Oklahoma were coming to the SEC. He actually asked the commissioner in front of everybody, "Are we allowed to do horns down or no?" Which is just awesome. I mean, what a way just to throw trash at the guys, at Texas before they're even in the conference. But I'm not going to be rearranging a lot of Saturdays to catch Missouri.
Yeah, I don't think many people are. But the thing of it is again, like, and this is the thing, right? We're talking about where Texas is going to fit into the SEC. Like, there is a version of events here where, like, Texas is like Texas loses to like Missouri, or like like somehow Vanderbilt, right? Like, maybe not Vanderbilt, but to be fair though, like if you're a team and you just get completely beat up, right? Like
Hmm.
again, by the time, like right now we're like, oh, they have B. John Robinson, but like they're going to lose a lot of those players. And if Sarkeesian remains head coach and they don't do well, then they might have a problem with recruiting some of these guys, and then all of a sudden, like, if your guys are getting beat up every week, then eventually, yeah, Vanderbilt might just find a spot for, like, might find a really good spot, and they could take you down. So
Yep.
no, yeah, Texas in the SEC is going to be fascinating. I'm excited to see the horrors of what that will bring, but moving on to actually, we mentioned already Vanderbilt. Yeah, this is again when we talk about teams that we think are going to get relegated in the future. Like, everybody immediately goes to Vanderbilt for reasons, right? For very good reasons. Why is Vanderbilt in the SEC? These are some really important questions. I mean, is there hope for Vanderbilt at all this year? I don't particularly see it. Like, this team is always pretty bad, and like they're one of the worst teams in college football, but yet they're also in the SEC. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, I'll put it this way. I'm I'm 1,000 times more bullish on Kansas than I am Vanderbilt. I mean, there's reason to hope there, and I think Clark Lee's smart. It's just you know you need somebody that's just a proven winner. It just the more we go along, the more miraculous it looks what James Franklin actually accomplished by taking them to a bowl, and making them actually pretty good. And I think they beat Florida one year, maybe even more than one year when he was there. Um, but yeah, I just again Vanderbilt not moving around plans to catch any Commodore games this season.
No, they're the doorstep of the SEC for a reason. Um, all right, so doormat. Sorry. All right, now let's talk about the really interesting teams here in the SEC. Auburn. This is gonna be fun. So yeah, this is the first time they've like soft launched the firing of their head coach before the season. I mean, what are they like? Here's the problem. This school, like they had a they had Gus Malzahn, who was like good, but he couldn't beat Alabama enough. So like, all right, let's hire this other guy. But he sucks, and then like, okay, let's try to fire him. But then that doesn't work out. And then now like, all right, let's just go with him. It's like, well, then who believes you're actually going to stick with this guy? Then like, this is the thing that Auburn is one of these like super competitive teams that they need a really good coach, and if they don't think their coach is there and or anything else, like they're they're gonna get rid of the guy, right? So they lost Bo Nix to Oregon. Bo Nix was, I mean, he's the definition of high variance. If you look it up in a textbook, there's just a picture of Bo Nix there. Um, Now they have Zach Calzada. That's not great. Um, yeah, I just, I mean, the thing is, again, we talk about this though, but they actually like surprisingly enough, they almost beat like Alabama last year somehow, which was so weird. Alabama was just a weird team last year. Like sometimes they'd be dominant, but other times they'd suck, and that's the thing. So I don't know. I I mean, this is gonna be like here's the thing. This has all the hallmarks of this is bad, and he's gone by like October. Um, but the question is how bad though. Auburn is still Auburn. They will still win some games. But the question is though, just like which games and like by how much, right? Like that's the thing. I'm not having much faith here in Auburn this year. What are your thoughts on this?
No, when I referred to Saban leaving Alabama and it's going to become like Iraq after Saddam Hussein, you kind of see that already at Auburn, where I like your soft launch phraseology. I almost liken it to an involuntary reflex where they're so used to just like somebody being angry and firing the coach and he doesn't get fired. I think it was just kind of another one of those actions that goes on in the Auburn area. I mean, just going back, it was Harson's there just born out of a bad process. Like they were going to hire Kevin Steele, which no, don't do that, because some powerful alums liked him, and there was just such a mess there that he was a compromise hire, and it just foreshadowed just what's going to happen. So to your point, are they going to get rid of him? Yeah, I mean they were going to get rid of him since the day that they hired him. He was literally in a hired to be fired spot. you know, the way they lost that Alabama game was truly unforgivable. For a guy who supposedly, I mean, he had a great record at Boise, but geez, how you cannot just, make sure that your running back stays in bounds and doesn't give the back to Alabama when you've got that lead is just ridiculous. And then not going for two when you're down to, I think TJ Finley was in there and he was hurt and they had a chance to win the game. I mean, just at that point, you knew it was going to be a rough offseason for him. Um, what's that borne out by? To your point, everybody knows he's going to be gone sooner rather than later. I'm definitely not a Bo Nix fan. Somehow he actually improved a lot under Harson, I think, because there's a better running game. But losing him and picking up Zach Calzada is basically it just shows that the stink of death is on him as a head coach. Not a lot of proven guys are going to come in for that. What I want to see is, as Bo Nix showed, what Harson does is actually better for the quarterbacks because he's got a good running game. So maybe, and I put a big question mark next to this, maybe Calzada improves in a simpler scheme if you take that, something that really helps the quarterback versus playing for Jimbo and just the Sudoku that is and just is so tricky for quarterbacks. Um, So maybe there's reason to be a little optimistic there. But then Harson did, in 2 spots, he did my least favorite thing. He got rid of his own or offensive coordinator, great, but he replaced him from his offensive coordinator from Boise, who was a position coach here. I don't like the internal hire at a big time program. Derek Mason, just speaking to the total dysfunction, he took a $400,000 pay cut to leave to go to Oklahoma State. Um, and then he was replaced by Harson's former defensive coordinator at Boise, who was a position coach, another internal promotion. I don't like it. The SEC win total is 2.5. That sounds right. I think it's going to be right around that number 2 or 3, but it's going to be awesome to watch it. Even though they're not a good team, I'm definitely going to arrange my Saturdays to see Auburn play because you never know, and there's going to be just a lot of drama and a lot of oh my god around it every Saturday.
Yeah, there are some teams that are like fun like this where it's gonna be like, okay, like say they're up like 10 points in the third quarter, be like, all right, how are they gonna lose?
Yep.
How are they gonna blow this? And that's the thing. The thing of it is 2.5 wins is so like, I mean, again, the SEC West is so variable. Like you like the thing of it is they could fire Harson and then they could win 3 games. Like, right, this is the thing. So you don't want to play that total. Like, is that what? Is he basically even? Is it -110 on the 2.5? Like, if you're getting juice on the under 2.5, maybe. But if it's even, then like that's not like this is the thing. It's not a that's not a particularly fun bet to make because they could do it, but like at the same point in time, yeah, that 2.5 SEC win total that makes sense. Um, all right. But yeah, I think we all agree that he will get fired at some point this year. And this is the problem, right? With a lot of these schools, like there's basic, especially at Auburn, you have massive conflicts between the boosters and the school administration, and this is the thing. A lot of the times what they'll do is a lot of teams, and Texas is definitely guilty of this. They'll pick like a hot shot coordinator. Like they pick Steve Sarkisian, who had one good season in Alabama, and then they'll
Mhm.
pick, like, for example, Auburn picks the head coach from Boise, and this is what they do. And then it backfires. Like they pick a head coach or a coordinator has one good season, and then it backfires. And then in a couple of years, they're like, "Oh, what went wrong?" It's like, "Well, you picked a guy who just had a really good year because of a quarterback, or because of a wide receiver, or because of a good defense or something." And then all of a sudden, you're like, "Well, how come that didn't translate?" It's like, well, they just got lucky that year because they played a bunch of bad teams. So this is the thing. It's you need to find someone who's kind of like, and again, it's kind of like a Kirby Smart, but even then, Kirby Smart wasn't always successful at first. You need someone who's going to manage the program, and I think maybe Florida, the one team we're going to talk about now, they kind of maybe found that with Billy Napier. But again, it's still a little too early to say that for sure. So Florida again is another interesting team here. This is actually a team I'm really interested to watch. So this is a team I'm a little bit of a Florida Gators fan. So this is again, and we talk about a crazy season. This team destroyed Tennessee. They beat them by like 21 points. They lost by Alabama by 2. They were tied with Georgia with 2 minutes to go in the first half. And but then they also lost to Missouri or South Carolina. I think it was one of those two.
It
That's the
was
thing.
both
And
of them.
both of them probably. Yeah, I think maybe both of them. This is the thing. So like at it, like if I said that resume for a team in the SEC, you'd be like, oh, maybe like, well, except for the Missouri South Carolina part, you're like, oh, that could be a good team this year. They could definitely regress in a positive direction. But we're not saying that about Florida. We're like, maybe they'll be better this year. The problem for this team for years has been the defense. I mean, this team surprisingly plays Alabama close. Whenever they play Alabama, they play them close. I think they were 18-point underdogs against Alabama in the SEC championship game in 2020 in that COVID year. And I think
Hmm.
the score was like, and like both teams got like over 50 points or something. It was insane. It was like the highest scoring SEC championship game ever. And the thing of it was they they could put up the points against Alabama. They just couldn't stop them from scoring. Right? And this is the thing. And that offense, like that defense, like the offense could always score points, but their defense could never get them back into the game. Their never defense could never shut them down. This is again the same defense that produced that guy who threw that shoe. This is crazy, insane stuff that's happened with this Florida defense. And it's definitely been the kryptonite. Like, the offense has been amazing. The offense has always been able to score points. It's just the defense can't get a stop when they need to. Like, the offense will go down, score 7 points, and then sure enough, the defense will do it right back. And then, like, you keep putting pressure on that offense, and eventually the offense will stop scoring, and then your defense just can't stop them. And that's the problem. So again, like, if Florida is able to get a better defense, which I think they definitely can here with Billy Napier, I think they could have a real shot here. And again, Dan Mullen was it was not a great, like, I mean, he was okay. He was bad at recruiting though, but like, I think this team actually has a lot of positives on it. If they can fix their defense, I think they can actually make a run here. And also, a lot of people at times last year, there's like about a week or two, I think people really liked Anthony Richardson, who was their quarterback. And now he's going to be the main starter. Emory Jones was transferred off to somewhere else. I think it's to I think he's to one of the Arizonas. I can't remember. Um,
Is it ASU?
ASU, Arizona State. Yeah. So, but this is the thing. Like, you're getting a guy who at one point was considered maybe a fringe Heisman candidate, fringe again, like a really far out, but like a potential. And like, this is the thing, like, I don't potentially hate Anthony Richardson for Heisman. I don't potentially hate Florida because Florida always plays Georgia close. Like, they were close with them, except that with like 2 minutes left to go in the half, like, they gave like a pick six, like a interception. Like, it was they scored, like, Georgia scored 21 points off of just horrible Florida plays in like 2 minutes. Like, if Florida beats Georgia and then they're able to clean up the defense for the rest of the SEC schedule, they don't play Bama this year. Florida could go to the SEC championship game. And then if you're playing an Alabama team, if your defense is good and if that Alabama team regresses a little this year, I don't know. It's maybe, is that crazy? What do you think? Is that too crazy or not?
I wish I had the optimism you're showing right now on a day-to-day basis. My life would be so much better. Um, I really don't see it. Um, the one thing, just to go back to them last season, they had this awesome stretch where, they lose to Kentucky on a last second game, or last second play, on a late touchdown. It might have been even as time expired or just about before time expired. And that was kind of like, uh-oh. And 2 weeks later, they lose to LSU, who's, about to fire their coach. And at that point, it became interesting because the whole parlor game was, oh, Dan Mullen might be in trouble. And then they go ahead the next week, they lose to Georgia. Okay, that happens. He might be in trouble. Then they lose at South Carolina. It's like, okay, well, they're going to fire him, but they're going to wait till the end of the season. And then they have this close game hosting Samford. And at that point, it was just, the die was cast, and then they lose at Missouri. It just, an for such a whatever team in terms of their statistics, just a great season to watch in terms of just grab your popcorn and just fun college football drama. Um, but they were kind of aside from the athleticism of Anthony Richardson, they were just not a remarkable team to watch at all. What the thing that's interesting was Emory Jones was by far the worst quarterback that Mullen had at Florida, which really is not what you want to see at year four. Year four is really when you're kind of getting your second wave of your kind of guys. So it was just not going to work. The thing that really is concerning is, Anthony Richardson, his QB plus was only 76, and that's, it's not terminal, but it's really not great. I like Billy Napier coming in. I was on him like in 2019. I actually had Louisiana beat their season win total back then. I just, had been a fan of his for a while. So bringing him in is good, but I kind of wonder, what are we left with at quarterback with, if those are the two quarterbacks that we had, Jones, who was, yeah, and then Richardson, who was just horrible as a passer. I'm really concerned about what we have at the quarterback position that Dan Mullen left. And I've read that basically Billy Napier is going to simplify the offense, and that's great if you have a guy like Anthony Richardson and you're playing in the MAC and you can do that. I think that might win you, maybe one game in the SEC, but it'll cost you a lot more just because it's his heroics just are not a week in, week out thing when you just can't throw the ball. I also just kind of wonder if Napier was very quick to set expectations of a long rebuild, and I'm wondering if, first and foremost, prompting him to make that declaration was seeing his quarterback position and thinking, "Uh-oh, um, I've got some building to do here." I don't think he recruited the quarterback that really turned things around at Louisiana, but he inherited a decently talented guy, and it's just not a parallel to the quarterback that he had at Louisiana and what he's inheriting here. Forget who we were talking about. It was Dana Dimmel, how he was good at Wyoming. Then we got to Houston. Houston hired him away from Wyoming, and he just didn't succeed because he didn't have the quarterback. You know, a coach needs a quarterback to be successful, and I like Napier, but I just don't see it happening from game one. So I think where you and I just kind of differ now, we kind of distill it is, faith in Anthony Richardson versus faith against Anthony Richardson. The conference total for their wins is 4. I find under very bettable. What's really interesting is it's a little kind of a dislocation, I think. The season total wins is 7, which is interesting because they've got 2 gimmies and they open with Utah and they close at Florida State. So that assumes that they're winning at least one of those, which I think is really optimistic. I'm not a fan of Florida State. I believe in Utah, but if you think the 4 conference wins is a solid number and you give them the 2 gimmies, they have to win at least one of those to still push. That's, you know, kind of speaks to an under there as well. I'm not going to play it because I can see it very much coming down to the game against Florida State, which I think might be a coin flip just because I don't know really. I'm questioning their trajectory at well. The other thing about Florida is I don't like their schedule. In week 2, okay, they start out hosting Utah, which isn't great, but not a conference game, so it's not fatal. Week 2 they host Kentucky, and we've kind of talked about I'm not a great believer in Kentucky this season, but if I'm Kentucky, I definitely want to play Florida in week 2 while they're still figuring things out before the end of the season when they might have a better clue as to what they're actually doing. This is just the worst possible time for them to play Kentucky. They get Tennessee again, a game that maybe they might have a chance in if you're optimistic, but they get them week 4. They're just, a team of this kind of rebuild is not going to win that game that early in the rebuild. The key game for them is week 7. They host LSU in the second part of back-to-back home conference games. They have to win that. They have to. And I've kind of expressed my admiration for Brian Kelly, so I think LSU wins it. But that to me, that's the fulcrum game for them.
Yeah, that does actually make a lot of sense there in terms of things. And I will say that when he says it's going to be a long rebuild, to be fair, maybe he doesn't necessarily mean at the quarterback position, but he might know a lot of stuff under the surface of like, okay, maybe we're not particularly deep on defense or whatever, and he knows the like again, he's able to make that determination better than we are. So we'll have to see, but then also it could be expectation management, right? It could be like, yeah, we're going to be rebuilding for a while, and they beat Utah week 1, right? So let's see what they could do. But I mean, they like Dan Mullen was basically fired among other reasons because he couldn't recruit, right? And I mean, to be fair, near the end of the season, he functionally was begging to be fired. So I think if the cupboard is bare at Florida, it could be a while, right? And we're gonna have to see how long this rebuild is gonna take. Um, all right, going to the West here for a second. Ole Miss. So this is a team that went 10-2 last season. Had a really good year. They lost the Sugar Bowl to Baylor because Matt Corral did get banged up a little bit in that game. He had a knee injury, so he left the game early. If not, I think they would have beat Baylor, but that's beside the point. Um, I don't like this is a team I'm definitely circling for regression this year. I cannot see this as being a particularly amazing team this year. I watched a lot of Ole Miss last year. I watched them against Bama. I watched them against a lot of other teams. Not a fan of Lane Kiffin and his play calling. There's a lot of times like here's the thing. I'm completely for going for it on fourth down at times when you like the metric you should be doing on fourth down is like the way I feel like, and again, there's analytics behind this, and you should be using analytics as well. But like the general rule of thumb for whether or not you should be going for it on fourth down is if you're the opposing team, do you want me to go for it on fourth down or
Yeah.
no? If you say I don't want this person to go for it on fourth down, then that means you should go for it. And if you say like, yeah, I'd love for them to go for it on fourth down, then you don't go for it, right? And like there was a lot of times against Alabama, they went for it in, like their own 40, and then they very clearly immediately they lost it and immediately got punished for that, right? And this is the thing. I have questions about playing calling with Lane Kiffin. I think they got lucky with Matt Corral, and I don't know if they're going to be able to replicate that again so soon. They have Jackson Dart, quarterback from USC, who was pretty good, but again, I'm not the biggest fan of Lane Kiffin in his play calling, and yeah, I definitely think they're a regression candidate for this year. I'm penciling them to do a little worse. What about you? What do you think here?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty straightforward case about their, why they're going to take a step back. Their improvement metrics are pretty much average, just in line with averages for FBS as a whole. You go from Matt Corral, who had QB pluses of 154 and 137. They go to Jackson Dart. Dak Dart had an 87. That's a little deceptive because he had an awesome game against Washington State in which he got injured. I think when he came back, he just wasn't the same. So I don't think he's as bad as that 87 indicates, but you're going to take a step back with, losing Matt Corral. He was truly just the leader of that team. You lose Jeff Lebby, the offensive coordinator, to Oklahoma. You bring in Charlie Weiss Jr., who did okay with Kiffin at FAU, but this is a different ball game. You lose a really good defensive coordinator, DJ Jerkin. I like the hire of Maurice Crum. They got him away from Western Kentucky. He sneakily did a really good job there, but I don't know if he's the same as Durkin. He might turn out to be better, but right now there's going to be a transition there. The other thing is they actually had good luck last season. I had him with over 2 games of good luck, and K Ford pretty much had the same, both at over 2 games of favorability last year. So it's in line with their 7.5 total wins that Vegas has. The one thing to kind of bring it back to a prior topic that we were talking about, when Brian Harsin gets fired from Auburn, they've clearly poisoned the well, and I think they are going to go for Lane Kiffin because he's dying to get out of Ole Miss, from what I've heard, and he would take that job in a heartbeat, and I think that they would take him in a heartbeat. And I think it's no coincidence that Tommy Tuberville did the same thing. I think there's just a limited Ole Miss, and it's a higher ceiling in Auburn. And I think it's interesting what that says about Ole Miss, because everybody knows what a mess Auburn's been forever. And yet, if you're in Oxford, you look at that and say, "Yeah, I'll take that chaos over this ceiling."
So you fail upward in the SEC West, I guess, right?
Yes.
If I'm Auburn, I would not hire Lane Kiffin, but again, I am not Auburn, so that's well, we'll have to see. But yeah,
Yeah.
that would be
I think that's a more interesting discussion than the Texas one, because I think Texas hasn't poisoned the well that much, and Auburn's painted themselves into a corner. This will be a really interesting discussion if we get there.
well. The thing of it is, I feel like Texas could be like the new See, again, it's gonna really and this Auburn will even matter to an extent too, because if the SEC starts moving away from divisions like they have now. Except we don't know what they're going to do. I don't think they're debating on if they're going to move away from divisions or not. Because like if you suddenly break up divisions and all of a sudden like half the teams are in the SEC West and the only way to get to the conference championship isn't beating Alabama,
Hmm.
then suddenly the SEC becomes way more competitive. And you make an argument you can make an argument probably now, but very soon now with Texas and Oklahoma in there and potentially with other conference expansion, you make a very strong argument that like, hey, okay, screw the whole number one versus number two conference championship. We're going to do a top four conference championship. We're going to do a round robin conference championship. There's going to be a 2 week conference championship, and that's it. You make a very strong argument for that. And and again, this is where like if suddenly if you're Auburn or you're Mississippi State or you're Texas, like if Texas just goes in the SEC West, which theoretically they should be in the SEC West, I guess, but you can't just keep at like if you just add teams, they can't just if they're west of like if they're west of Auburn, you can't just start putting them into the SEC West. Like you need to put some in the East, right? Like so like this is the thing, right? So at a certain point, like they're gonna have to rebalance the divisions in some way, and this is the issue that I see. Like we'll have to see. It's going to be really interesting. But yeah, like and this is the interesting question is if the SEC does move away from divisions and Auburn, the measuring stick for Auburn isn't beating Alabama, because to be honest, I'm fairly sure Auburn would be perfectly fine if like the reason, like obviously they hate Alabama, right? They're their number one rival and they hate Alabama and they want to beat Alabama every year. But if suddenly it's like, hey, guess what? You can actually go to the national championship game and or go to the SEC championship without having to beat Alabama on Thanksgiving weekend. Maybe they're like, yeah, okay, maybe we don't need to beat Alabama every year. Maybe
Yeah.
we don't need to. Maybe we can beat them every other year, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
this is the thing. So no, I'm not completely like I think it's an interesting take as to how this could work. But we're gonna have to see. I'm interested to see how this will all shake out. There's a lot of unknowns in the next couple of years of college football, but in the immediate future, Auburn is definitely gonna to fire their coach. But the thing is, again, for Texas though, like Texas in the future, if in the event of them being in the SEC and being in a similar situation to Auburn, I think they are like the number one like future Auburn. Like they're on the path towards Auburn, if that makes any sense. Like
Yep.
they could
Yeah.
definitely be like in the future, like the thing of it is, I feel like the only metric for Texas is like don't screw up, just win like 9 or 10 games a year, beat Oklahoma generally, and then you're fine. But Auburn, it's like okay, you need to be like perfect and beat Alabama, and then like they can't do that, and then they so that's the issue. So no, I'm interested to see how the SEC looks in the future.
Yep.
Tennessee here. So this was an interesting year for them. They started Joe Milton over Hendon Hooker for a couple games. Then he lost the job. Then Hooker was actually pretty good. There was that Ole Miss game, which was weird.
Weird. That's a very kind characterization.
Very kind characterization in that Tennessee Ole Miss game. Again, the SEC has some very interesting moments. They were actually a pretty good team. Weirdly, they didn't cover the spread against Florida somehow. But no, I mean, this is an interesting team. But again, we talk a lot about these SEC teams, and it's like, oh, look, here's a quarterback who shows some promise. And this thing, we never used to talk about SEC quarterbacks. Like the SEC was always big for like defenses and like running backs and stuff like that. Now they're starting to actually recruit quarterbacks. So they're like, hey, we could actually score points if we have decent quarterbacks. So, I mean, the thing is, again, I feel like we've now like and not us per se on this podcast, but I think in general there is too much hype around too many SEC quarterbacks. I think one or two of them will fail, right? Like we're gonna be like, oh, I can't believe we ever thought like Hendon Hooker was a quarterback, or but like maybe not necessarily Hooker, but it's gonna be one of Hooker or Levis or Anthony Richardson or KJ Jefferson, maybe even probably not Bryce Young. People really like Bryce Young, but it theoretically, like statistically, could be like I feel like one or two of these is going to suck, and people are going to be like, "Oh, I can't believe we ever thought they were good." Or like South Carolina, right? South Carolina, we didn't really talk about them too much. They do finally have a quarterback with Spencer Rattler, um, but this is the thing, right? Like I feel like there's too many good quarterbacks, and I feel like it's unfortunate, but I think a couple of them are gonna. It's kind of like the snake eating itself. I feel like a couple of them are gonna kind of get knocked off, and we're never gonna really hear from them again.
Yeah, I agree. The thing when you talk about Hendon Hooker and Joe Milton, I have no idea what Josh Heupel is thinking. I mean, Joe Milton was pretty much proven to be a stiff at Michigan, and then he just removed all doubt with his horrible performance. He didn't have enough attempts to qualify, but if you just do the calculation, his QB plus was 54 last season, which is just absurd. What's really interesting to me, I mean, I liked Hooker when he was at Virginia Tech. Something weird happened in that COVID season. That whole COVID season was really weird for Virginia Tech, so we kind of throw that out. But last year, Hendon Hooker had a QB plus of 167, which was top in the SEC and third nationally. And if you go back 2 seasons ago to 2019, he had a QB plus of 162. So, I was not surprised by what he did. Apparently, Josh Heupel was, but however it happened, he stumbled into his guy finally. What's really crazy to me is I had, and I'd be kind of curious if what you show lines up with this. I had Tennessee's offense third in the SEC, but fourth nationally, which is just a tough draw. I mean, to be third in your conference, even though you're top four in the country, is just brutal. Their defense was the weak part of the team. But if you kind of just say, look, who were the top defenses last season? It was definitely Georgia, Alabama, and Texas A&M. And after that, you get to the next tier, and they fit right into that. So they're not a dominant defense, but it's not like they're a horrible defense. And I think their offensive is good enough to win most of the games that they need. Um, their defense should improve. It's an above average improvement metric coming into this season. Their defensive coordinator Tim Banks did really good at Penn State. It's his second season, even though their defense was not great. He did improve them by almost a half a yard per play last season, which is significant. Um, if you just kind of look going forward this season, I have them. I'm curious how you feel about this too. I have them as underdogs only to Bama and Georgia in this season. I think they're favored in every other game for this season. So
So you have them favored over Florida. That would be interesting.
yeah,
Yeah. Florida will be a tough game for them. I think they could lose that one. But and
really.
Georgia, usually Florida beats Tennessee. Um,
Yeah, I just can't see Florida keeping pace with them offensively.
well, we'll see. But I can kind of agree with that. But we'll see. Florida, I kind of think Florida could surprise. But again, that's going to be kind of an in the season thing. Like I could be wrong, but like by week 3, I'll know. I'll be like, okay, I was wrong. Right? Like if Florida loses like by like 30 to Utah, I'm like, okay, fine, we're done now. But we'll see. But no, it's I f- f- Tennessee is an interesting one because yeah, like outside of Bama and Georgia, there aren't really many other teams that Tennessee should be that much worse than. Apparently, just hopefully not Purdue. Purdue's not in the SEC, so they don't have to play them again. But no, like this is the thing, right? So like yeah, like a 10-2 season is definitely possible for Tennessee, or 10-2 or 9-3 if they drop it at a random game there. I and again, the thing is like even a 9-3 season, I think that probably would be depending on what happens at the SEC West, that might be good enough for the Sugar Bowl or whatever the Sugar Bowl would be, I guess, because I'm not sure if the Sugar Bowl is like the semifinal this year or not, but whatever the Sugar Bowl would be, like they can maybe make a New Year's Six bowl,
Hmm.
and that's the thing. So, but the thing of it is, I feel like at some point, like one of these quarterbacks we're talking about is probably going to underperform, and it could be Hendon Hooker. But he was pretty good though. But this is the thing. I feel like we need to be on the lookout for one of these quarterbacks underperforming. But anyway, moving on to the
One
Sun
last
Belt,
thing
which
on
is
them, just one
oh
last thing. I think if you look at the schedules for both Alabama and Georgia, I think between all of the schedule, all the games that both those teams have scheduled, I think the most losable game that they have is to Tennessee, each of them, which is interesting. I'm not saying it'll happen, but it's a pretty good gauge of where Tennessee is.
and that is an interesting point too, right? Because again, Tennessee was pretty bad. I mean, they this is his what? This is the head coach is what, his second year. This is
Second season, yeah.
second season, yeah. Because they came in from because there was a massive scandal with the last head coach. He came in and he's really turned the program around in just a short amount of time. So, and again, Tennessee is again we talk about. It's not exactly Auburn, but it's not Auburn either, and it's not Texas either. Like there's a lot of these ones that are like they're not like Auburn is like like yeah they very clearly tried to do a coup and it failed, and also Texas also tried to do a coup, not last year but the year before to get Urban Meyer, which apparently thank God they didn't get Urban Meyer. That would have been apparently
Yeah.
worse than Sarkeesian. But this is the thing, right? So it's really difficult to like it's the SEC East, and you know what I mean, like if Tennessee has a ceiling year, could they potentially knock off Georgia and go to the like could they beat Georgia again though? But and again, as you said, you have them favored. You have them basically the only two dogs you have them to are Alabama and Georgia. Well, guess what? That's the whole game. That's the ball game, right? Like to win the SEC East or to win the championship game, you need to beat those teams, right? And that's the thing. You can't beat them. You're not moving on. Maybe you can get a New Year's Six, but if you can't beat them, you're not getting there, right? And I think that's the at the end of the day, that's the issue that a lot of these teams face, and it's gonna be it's an interesting year to see if they can actually overcome that, or if there's a ceiling of just like okay, there's two teams we can't beat, and then that's it. So anyway, moving on to the Sun Belt here. Old Dominion is a very interesting team. So this is a team that I think they were what, like a 16-point underdog in their bowl game this year, and I think they won. Um, just a crazy year for them. Um, they're a relatively unknown team, but I really do kind of like them. They're like, you love a lot of teams that are like super under the radar. Um, yeah. What are your thoughts on this team here?
Just a really interesting story. So they didn't. So after 2019, they fired their coach. I apologize for not knowing what his name is. So they bring in Ricky Ronnie from Penn State. Then they don't play in the 2020 season. So you've got a new coach who's trying to start, and basically he's got nothing to do for a season. So then after they play for what after not playing for 21 months, they started the season understandably 1-6. Um, which I think anybody would have expected. Just in that situation, it's going to be a rough season. But then they ended the season 5-0, which is just absurd. Now they did it against a truly murderer's row of ineptitude. Louisiana Tech, who fired their coach, Florida International, who fired their coach, FAU, who had problems all over the place, Middle Tennessee, who should have fired their coach, Charlotte, who's thinking about firing their coach now. But still, to go 5-0 to make a bowl in that situation is amazing. Um, what's interesting is if you break up their metrics before that 5 game streak and during that 5 game streak, they really were two teams. Now I'm sure some of it's the caliber of opponent, but my metrics account for the caliber of opponent. So some of it's just like getting the rust of 21 months away, out of the system. They actually, in those last 5 games, their offense was actually above average for all FBS, which says a lot for a Conference USA team. And they're above average for the Sun Belt East, which is Sun Belt's a good conference and the East is a tougher division. Same thing. Their defense actually for the season was above average and better than the Sun Belt East average. So sneakily, a pretty good team that got really hidden by that horrible start of theirs. Um, there's only 6 teams that have statistically significant improvement metrics on both the offensive line and defense, and they're one of them, which really is promising considering that break they had. It makes sense considering that they probably just had a complete rebuild of the roster, especially with that extra season to really have a lot of chance to just figure things out on the roster. They moved from Conference USA to the Sun Belt East, and that's a big step up. And like I said, it's the tougher of the two divisions in the Sun Belt East. Um, what's really interesting about their schedule too is in the first 3 weeks they host Virginia Tech and they're at Virginia, and those are two Power Five teams, and they're both headed by first-time head coaches. So there's a bit of a soft target there, I think, in each of those games. The season total for them is 4.5. I'm definitely going over on them. I think that's a really solid play. Um, a good story in a sneakily tough division, but I think that they could be a lot better than anybody expects.
Yeah, and again, there's every year there's always a couple of surprise teams like that. Um, Georgia Southern, again, this is another name that people don't necessarily there's not a lot of hype on them. Um, again, this is a kind of team that, so they have, I don't know, this again, a lot of these teams don't get a lot of attention, and again, like only a season win total of 4. What are your thoughts on this team?
Yeah, I think that this is just destined to go horribly. Clay Helton, he inherited a really talented team at USC, and he just let that just go to heck, and he frittered away a bunch of talent to the point where he got fired. In that last his last season, his last you know few teams were just horribly lacking physicality, and it's funny that they brought him in there to really transform the offense. It's just he's not the guy. He transformed USC, but not in the way that anybody would want to. And now he's supposed to fix Georgia Southern. His offensive coordinator, Brian Ellis. He was the offensive coordinator at Western Kentucky, and then he got demoted to position coach when they brought in the guy that actually fixed stuff there. His defensive coordinator, Will Harris, actually played at USC under Pete Carroll, and he was last seen as the cornerback coach at Washington. And I bring this up because Helton doesn't have a Rolodex. He doesn't have contacts. He doesn't have legitimately good coaches that want to work for him. So he has to extend offers like this to to people that are a stretch in this kind of position. They were horrible on both offense and defense last season. They were about a touchdown below average. Um, in the bottom three of the Sun Belt in both sides of the ball, which is, pretty tough to do unless your name is Butch Jones. They're starting over on the offensive line. They have the sixth lowest national improvement metric on the offensive line. And if you saw anything over the progress of Clay Helton's teams at USC, as they got markedly less and less physical as we go along. So now he doesn't even have a good place to start with. So I think that's just going to, start at a bad place and go worse. The quarterback is interesting. Kyle Van Treese, he was at Buffalo. So 2 years ago, under Lance Leopold, who we all, those of us in the know love, Kyle Van Treese had a QB plus of 130. Then Leopold goes to Kansas. Van Treese stays in Buffalo, and his QB plus drops to 89. So I bring that up because this tells me this guy's great when he's got a good coach, and when he doesn't have a good coach, he's not good. And I kind of made clear where I think Clay Helton stands in the good or not good division of head coaches. And it's also important to note that the Sun Belt East is much, much, much better than the MAC. I love the MAC, but it's different kind of game. Much better athletes in the Sun Belt East. They're losing a decent amount on defense as well. Like I said, they're in the harder division of the Sun Belt. There's actually 4 programs in the East that really know how to win this program. The schedule doesn't help them either. They get the 2 cross division teams they get are Louisiana, who won the division last year, and South Alabama, who's definitely in the top 3, if not the top 2, if not the top in that division. I have them favored only versus Morgan State. They have a couple that are probably toss-ups, so I'm going well below the season total of 4 wins.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely a possibility. Clay Helton was definitely not particularly great at USC, and I think that it's a really good point there about Van Treese, right? I was a big fan of Buffalo. I like obviously when Lance Leopold was there and head coach, they were a great team, and Van Treese was amazing, right? I expected Buffalo to do something. Like they played Nebraska last year. They're like 14-point dogs. I'm like, Nebraska sucks. They should be able to cover that, and they didn't, right? And this is the thing. So yeah, I'm a fan of going with I'm a fan of kind of going with betting against a quarterback who took a massive step down when he had a worse head coach. Now he may actually have an even worse head coach. And yeah, and it got like again, there's a lot of the times what a lot of these kind of tier 2 schools will do is when like a head coach from a different like from a division 1 or well upper like a kind of a power 5 school, they lose their job like Clay Helton or Charlie Weiss or something else, or they'll get when they get fired, or Tom Herman, or yeah, it was Tom Herman. They when they get fired, they'll come down to another school, and then generally it doesn't particularly work, right? Charlie Weiss got fired from USF. So this has generally not been when you take a step down. These guys they don't generally perform particularly well. Like they don't usually take it as like, yeah, this is my chance. They're like, I don't want to work here. I'm just collecting a paycheck, right? And I never these have never particularly gone particularly well. There's not like a revenge story where it's like, yeah, I'm gonna get back at that team. It's just like I'm done, right? Um, moving on to Louisiana here. So obviously they lose Billy Napier, who's now the head coach of Florida. They lose a lot this year. They were good last year, but again, this is kind of one where and again, this is also kind of a canary in the coal mine for Florida here, right? So if they do well this year, and maybe that wasn't Billy Napier's building, maybe it was him building it and leaving some pieces left. But if they do poorly this year and Florida as well, then it's very clearly that was Billy Napier doing it, right? So I mean, obviously, when you lose a piece like that, I generally expect regression here. Are you also penciling in regression for this team this year?
Yeah, I see a lot of the same case to be made against Louisiana as was made against Ole Miss. Starting over at quarterback after a really good quarterback, one of the best in the program's history. They lose a lot on the offensive line. Now I think Napier recruited pretty well there, so that might not be a fatal blow, but still just starting over, especially for a first-time head coach, is going to be tough. They're starting over offensive and defensive coordinator as well. Um, the thing is, too, they actually had exceptional good luck. You know, K Ford and I both agree exactly on the number. I had him at 2.4 games of good luck last season, and K Ford has that as their regression going forward. So that really lines up with their record last season and the Vegas having them at 8.5 wins this season. I think that that might be a little high, if anything, just given natural regression against the luck and then everything they lose too. If I'm not going to play it, but anything, I think they're going to go under that 8.5.
Well, again, and that's one where you can just play it as like, okay, we'll bet week to week spread, right? And that's the thing. And a lot of the ones you can do that with. So, yeah, that's definitely a candidate for that. Um, South Alabama. So this is another potentially interesting one. I know they got a good draft pick last year. They had I think it was Jalen Tolbert went to Dallas. So they have some pieces. Um, what are your thoughts on this team this year? You got a lot here. What
I
you have?
do.
You seem to have a lot of thoughts about the South Alabama team. And again, it's good to talk about random teams that again a lot of people don't think about. People don't really think about South Alabama. Like I know what their logo is, but I guarantee you most people wouldn't be able to pick out their logo from a police lineup. But what what are your thoughts on this team this year?
For anybody that doesn't think about South Alabama, rest assured, I'm doing a lot of thinking for them. Okay. Um, Clearly, I've got first to go over the background for their head coach, Kane Womack. He was a defensive coordinator here in 2016 and 17. Just in his first year there, he improved their defensive rating by my metrics by over 3 points, which is significant. He was there in 17 as well. When he left in 2018, the defensive rating worsened by over 5 points, which is significant. So he left to go to Indiana. I think Kevin Wilson was still the coach there at 2018. So he was a linebacker coach in 2018. 2019, he becomes defensive coordinator. At that point, in that one season, their defense improved by almost 5 points again, which is very significant. 2020, they had that really cool kind of weird COVID year where their defense was awesome at Indiana. So that gets him the South Alabama job since he's a known quantity there. In his first year as head coach, he improved the defensive rating of South Alabama 7 points in one year. And for some context of what kind of scale that is, 7 points is basically the difference between Western Kentucky's defense and Clemson's defense last year. So that's a huge improvement. Um, and I love, 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 love when you have a coach who specializes on one side of the ball and immediately makes an impact. I think local to me, USC was not special in Pete Carroll's first year, but he immediately turned around the defense. The defense made a huge step forward. And if your coach does that, it just shows that he's making a difference. He knows how to get through to any players because he didn't, he probably recruited. No, I don't think he recruited any of the guys that were on that team last year. But he can basically coach up whatever he's dealt. And having been from there, he will improve the talent level. He knows, South Alabama is interesting. Just a little side note here. They're in like a sneaky good spot. The southern part of those, Gulf states, there's a lot of talent there. And there's a lot of guys that basically the SEC is not going to look at that, the MAC's not going to bother trying to get. That's just, very nearby talent. That's, far above what a lot of other G5 talent is. So I love where the defense has gone. Huge improvement in one season. I didn't know this until I just did this research. So their offensive coordinator is Major Applewhite. Used to be quarterback at Texas. Then he was eventually he was their quarterback coach, and he got promoted to be offensive coordinator at Houston, then Houston's head coach. They let him go because he wasn't a great head coach. Fine. I didn't know this. He actually went to Alabama to be an analyst under Nick Saban. Wasn't a position coach, but much like other decently talented guys, he just got to be part of the Bama program and went through the Nick Saban car wash. Um, so he comes back to South Alabama, a little bit of improvement, not much in the defense, but this is really, really, really impressive to me. He got Jake Bentley, who was not so good at South Carolina and was just stink out loud horrible at Utah. Jake Bentley had a 69 QB plus at Utah, and he improved him to 114 QB plus last year, which is really impressive. So now they pick up the quarterback from Eastern Michigan, or no, Toledo, pardon me. Toledo had a really good tandem of quarterbacks, and this kid just came out of the wrong end of that. This kid lands at South Alabama. I think there's a lot to work with there. They had a horrible rushing offense last season, and they were the worst of any team that ran over 50% of the time. I think they're going to improve, even though there's a lot to start from in terms of they have a lot of ground to make up. But this is interesting. They have, of their 5 starters, they have a transfer from Mississippi, one from Mississippi State, and one from Florida State. I think that will, at the very least, fit in well in the Sun Belt West. When you get to their schedule, their first 4 games is pretty interesting. They're going to be big favorites in 2 of the games against Nicholls and Louisiana Tech. They're going to be a big underdog against Louisiana or at UCLA, and they're going to be, I think, a decent dog at Central Michigan. I'd probably have that about even, but I think they're probably going to be about a 4 or 5 point dog. It's a good mix. You get a good mix of games to see, home road, different expectations, just to get a good picture of what you've got here. Um, they're in the easier division of the 2 in the Sun Belt. The schedule is really good. They get Georgia Southern, who I kind of just murdered. They host Old Dominion, who I like, but at least they get them at home in the last game of the season. Their season win total is 6, and I am definitely all over the over here. That's one of my top 3 plays in terms of expected ROI. They're plus is a hard number to say, plus 1,050 per Circa Sports to win the Sun Belt, which I think is a fair price given the likelihood that I see them of getting to the championship game and then just kind of parlaying that with a money line. I think there's some value there. What's really interesting too is that they're second in their division behind Louisiana, who I think you and I both see having some serious regression. So I think the path is there, and that really informs the value of the over 6 in the season win totals as well.
Yeah, that's all good points. I'm on board with this team now. I like this team. This sounds like a fun team. I'm rooting for this team now. So yeah, I'll definitely bet the over 6. And yeah, I mean, again, and again, I've said this before. I'll keep saying it again, right? Teams that are under the radar that are improving
Yeah.
against teams that didn't win the conference last year but improved, and the teams around them that were better than them last year getting worse. Perfect spot. And again, like, you want dogs that are like 10-1, 20-1 to win conference championships, because those are the ones that do, right? Especially in a conference like the Sun Belt or Mountain West, or whatever, right? Obviously, you're not gonna the team that's 10-1 to win the SEC is not that's not the team, but like 10-1 to win the
Yes.
Sun Belt, that's fine. That's good. That's a good thing. But so that's the thing. So yeah, so a lot of interesting plays there. I think that's the SEC done. Some of the ACC, I think we only got what the ACC. We got the rest of the ACC, and then the Pac-12,
Mountain
and
West.
Mountain West, and then I think that's about it. I think that kind of wraps us up for
We got
for.
the Big Ten East. I think we've got some
Oh yes,
pieces
that's right. The
there.
Big Ten East. Yeah, that's
We just took some
the
shots
more
at Sean
interesting Big
Clifford,
Ten.
and that's it.
Yeah, the most interesting division in the Big Ten East. So that's the more interesting one. So a couple more things, but yeah. So but we're almost there. This is almost the end of our the end of our previews journey, but the beginning of the college football season. So thank you for coming on again tonight. And yeah, we'll be back in maybe a week or so with some more previews, and then we're very close to the season, right? This is a Thursday. We're recording this on a Thursday night. There was two NFL preseason football games on just a little bit ago. So yeah, it's football season, guys. So pretty soon now we're gonna see some college football. So see you guys next time.